Good morning and welcome again. This is Sunrise Daily, bang in the middle of the week. I'm Ayo Makinde. Did you remember, we've been talking about this CCT chairman story, something that happened in Abuja. Well, good morning, Markwe.
When you mentioned Abuja, you remembered I was here.
Oh,
good morning, Ayo, and good morning to our viewers this morning, watching from wherever it is you're watching us in the world.
Yeah. So that story that broke in Abuja months ago now, well, there has been an update, and maybe you should take a look.
For the past 3 months, the Senate Committee on Ethics has attempted to investigate assault allegations against the chairman of the Code of Conduct Tribunal, Mr. Danladi Umar. A video surfaced online in March showing the CCT chairman allegedly assaulting a security guard at the Banex Plaza in Abuja. The victim, Mr. Clement Sagwat, petitioned the Senate asking the upper chamber to investigate the alleged assault by the CCT chairman. But the investigation by the Senate Committee on Ethics, Privileges and Public Petitions has consistently hit brick walls. First, the CCT chairman, at his earliest appearance before the committee, begged for time to study the petition.
I've been most obliged if you can give me a week or so to be able to respond to this.
Mr. Umar declined to show up at the next invitation, citing illness, and at a subsequent hearing, his attorney told the committee that Mr. Umar filed a suit at the Federal High Court in Abuja on July 13th to challenge the constitutional powers of the Senate to conduct an investigative hearing on the assault case.
The papers you brought, that summon has no effect on hearing this case before Nigerians. Because it's an afterthought, an attempt to ambush justice.
However, at the resumption of the hearing on Tuesday, the committee is taking a new stand on the case, but it's a position which the lawyer to the petitioner disagrees with.
The committee hereby ruled that we will set aside this particular case, sine die, pending the determination of the case in court that Senate has a right to hear this case.
It is a mere process, a mere court process served on the Senate. Now, the only thing that can stop the Senate of this country from going on with this hearing is an order, a valid order of a court of competent jurisdiction.
Members of the committee are not the only ones waiting to see the outcome of the case in court. The alleged victim, his legal team and the public observing the case to see the conclusion. Linda Akibi, Channels Television News.
Well, that is the update. And interestingly, just about 2 days ago, I was reading that report again in the media, and I was, online, I was just wondering what that young man must have gone through at the time. And I'm just wondering what's going to happen. The man had said repeatedly that he wasn't going to sue, given what he went through, in the hands of security operatives, the police, the DSS, which of course the DSS denied, that he wasn't ready to do anything, that he was just going to hand over everything to God. And I'm just wondering how many such cases there have been. There is the legality of the law, and then there is the morality. The question that I'm just asking, and I keep asking in my mind is that it? And seeing this report by the position of the Senate now, simply because there is a court, process going on that could impede this. And I'm just wondering, is that all that we're going to hear about this case? The young man is not going to get any more justice than the sympathy of Nigerians? I'm just wondering. Okay.
And I think that That last question, which you just asked, Ayo, is the most important one. Whether or not that young man will get justice, apart from the sympathy that Nigerians will have for him, and that's it. You know, that's where it ends. What happens in this sort of situation where, you know, there is evidence. This is not something that is speculative. There is evidence of what transpired, you know, at Banex Plaza here in Abuja. We saw the embarrassing, to put it very mildly, the embarrassing, if not disgraceful statement put out by the Code of Conduct Tribunal chairman spokesperson, or supposed spokesperson, because there are questions as to who are the people who man his publicity office. What is the level of the cadre of staff? I mean, what is the quality of their training? What is, who are the people there? There were huge questions when that statement came out, that how could this ever have emanated from a government parastatal or from a government institution, you know. It left many people wondering what had happened in that situation. Just in case you cannot remember, you know, the grammar in it was badly written. You know, the sort of words, the choice of words used made a lot of people feel, you know, insulted. There were big questions as to what was going on in that particular government institution. But let's leave that aside and look at the issue itself. Well, this young man has chosen to petition the Senate instead, the National Assembly instead, to look into his matter. Perhaps because we also know just how long cases could be in court and how long they could drag on for, how expensive it might be to have this case in court. And so he sought some sort of quasi-court, the National Assembly, which sometimes exercises this when I say extrajudicial powers, but they have the powers to, you know, conduct this sort of investigation, and they took it on. And we've seen just how the process has gone. As our correspondent did report, they have met all manner of obstacles. Oh, give me time. Oh, I'm not feeling well. Then much later, you know, I'm not showing up because I've gone to court. Let the court determine whether you have the power to carry out this sort of investigation in the very first place. Absolutely no iota of remorse. One would think that when this sort of thing happens, the least that can happen is an apology. At the minimum, oh, you know, my emotions got the better of me, or whatever it is that you want to say, and apologize. And sometimes this has the capacity to heal 1,000 injuries. But this is not what we have seen. What we have seen is, I did what I did, and, you know, it's in your face. Do what you want about it. I've gone to court, or meet us in court. And that sort of attitude, you know, continues to make people, don't forget that we're rather in very delicate times, Ayo, where people feel like they cannot get justice, where people feel like they're oppressed, the economy is skewed, you know, the inequalities are there. When you take a look at the position of this young man, this lowly security man who was simply keeping watch in the marketplace, and, you know, you have this big man, so to speak, in his big car, so to speak, and you look at the dynamics there, you already imagine what is coming to play and why this young man will have sympathy. It's beyond this case, Ayo. It has implications for the general Nigerian society. It shows just how easy or how difficult the hurdles, assuming you, I mean, if you were in that sort of position, and many people are, how difficult it is for those kinds of people to get justice against those whom they believe, you know, are on the other side, you know, out there. I don't want to use the word oppressors, but I can't find any better word to use in this particular context. So I want to believe that we will understand the significance of this case, what it holds for our society. And I'm hoping that, you know, better judgment will prevail, that there will be a place where we will all be equal before the law, there will be a place where it doesn't matter who you are. If you feel aggrieved, you can approach the National Assembly or you can approach the courts and you will be able to get justice. Because these are the things that enables a society that is progressively minded, a society that seeks justice for all, a society that seeks equality. These are the sort of things that propels this sort of cases are the kinds of things that people can hold up as instances to say, look at this case. In this instance, this person was able to get justice. So you should be able to follow this process to be able to get justice. If you cannot follow these processes, what you will get is mob action. And that is what we're running away from. Ayo.
Unfortunately, has been happening, Mark, where, mob action against some legislators has kept so many of them away, from, going back home, so to speak. We have seen that, repeatedly in a number of cases. And to that letter, of course, you remember that that young man had to be recalled, whether he's been returned or someone else posted there. Well, that's another matter altogether. But you see, the issues, the much far-reaching implications that you mentioned are very, very strong. Unfortunately, I don't recall listening to or hearing as prominently any political leader speaking for this young, lowly man, as one may describe him. With the poverty figures, the skyrocketing hunger issues, the poverty figures in the country, and the level of inequality all over the nation. Is this in a way saying that indeed it is true when people say poverty has been weaponized and consequently anyone who is down the ladder should remain there? This case is just a case in point. And who knows how many millions of other cases there are all over the nation. Well, let's just take a look at some other issues all over the nation from the papers this morning. All right, so the papers this morning, today's papers, will begin with the Vanguard newspaper, and it's still on that issue of Sunday Igboho on the front page. Sunday Igboho faces fresh charges in Benin Republic, and that story you will find on page 5. No date fixed for hearing, that's one of the writers. Stop pressurizing Benin Republic to extradite Igboho, Yoruba group tells FG. A story you'll find, as I said, on page 5 of the paper this morning. Right under that one, CBN goes tough, cancels dollar sale to BDCs. Stories on page 7. Very many implications here, very, very many implications. What happens to the jobs of those who operate BDCs and thousands of other issues. But then, what are the far-reaching implications? Just stick with us this morning. You may get an inkling or two. Right under the picture you see there of new Lagos local government chairman. Anti-open grazing law. Herders won 750,000 square meters of land in Delta. Rage over Enugu killings. Find that story on page 27. Anybody who wants to ranch should buy land, says the Delta state government. Find the details on the inside pages this morning. Presidency warns staff against leaking classified information. Stories on page 9. And Lagos-Ibadan Expressway, FG diverts traffic for 72 hours to flyover beam. Find that one on page 10. What it's about, the details are on the inside pages. Very quickly, Mr. and Mrs. And Mrs. says, first of all, to Mr. Darling, Mr. Gabriel is an angel. And Mr. says, because he gave you 50,000 naira. Why don't you drop the Mr. and call him Angel Gabriel? Nonsense. And of course, back page has sports. Tokyo Olympics ouster have disappointed Nigerians. Quadri cries out. Oh dear. Bundled out by a lowly rated Brazilian. Wow. Well, so many others you'll find on the back page of the Vanguard newspaper this morning. Okay.
Oh dear, you know, sometimes it happens to the greatest of them all. But what's Mr's beef this morning? Come on, this is just celebrating a little. When you look at what's on the front page of The Guardian this morning, they have a different take on that CBN story. In rare courage, CBN weakens BDC operations, stops FX funding. That's how The Guardian is capturing it. In rare courage, I think that says a lot. CBN weakens BDC operations, stops FX funding, indicts operators for money laundering. We receive 5,000 fresh BDC applications monthly, says Emefiele. MPR, other monetary parameters retained. Decision, a rumor until we see CBN secular. Operators insist. Okay. Codrus research. Discontinuation of FX to BDC will affect exchange rate. Nigeria to launch digital currency e-Naira in October. So you find all the details on page 2. The CBN governor did have a lot to say yesterday, and we had a pretty good analysis on it from Mr. Bismarck Romani, who was talking about the implications of this and why that decision was necessary. I mean, when you look at the figures, the fact that we had only 75 BDCs how many years ago, maybe about 10 years ago, and in the spate of, okay, maybe slightly more than 10 years ago, in 2010, according to him, he says we had about 2,000 BDCs. Today, we have over 5,000 BDCs, and you can see here saying the CBN saying that they receive 5,000 fresh BDC applications monthly from just 75 less than 20 years ago. So there are huge questions as to what exactly has been going on there. Page 2 is where you'll find details of all that happened at the MPC meeting yesterday. Then you also see this one, facts about Nigeria's food inflation. It's a survey on the front page of The Guardian. Oshibajo laments post-harvest losses, says transforming Africa's food system a public-private affair. The details on page 2 of the paper. You have a number of other stories at the bottom, one of which is this one. Senate chickens out, halts probe of CCT chair for alleged assault. So that story is also there. The picture is also worth 1,000 words. One of the things I always marvel at is how, or I'm marveling at, is how quickly the newly inaugurated council chairman and their vices have gotten the Ashorebis ready. We saw that in Ogun State when they were inaugurated, and you know, we're also seeing that in Lagos. Huge questions in that one. But you might want to see details of the story. The picture story on page 8 of the paper. Let's leave it there for The Guardian.
The Nigerian Tribune leads with this one, same issue of BDCs. To plug leaky reserves, CBN stops forex sales to BDCs. Find the story on page 6. Accuses international bodies of illegal forex dealings. Asks banks to set up teller points for forex sales to customers, retains MPR at 11.5%. All of that you'll find on page 6 this morning. Well, to use Marquez's words, the Ashorebi picture is right there also on the front page of the Nigerian Tribune this morning. And right under the nameplate, e-transmission, INEC should be left to decide, says Fayemi. Story is on page 4. EFCC freezes account of Oyo Assembly official over 1 billion naira car purchase probe. Wow. Stories on page 2. I will never go back to APC, says Tambuwal. Find the story on page 4 of the paper this morning. Reps probe alleged killing of 5 in Iseyin by customs officials. That is something that shouldn't have happened in the first place, but indeed it did. Right under the picture, 1 police officer, 6 bandits killed as police repel attack on Imo community. You find it on page 28, 11 suspects arrested. The back page also has sports. That same story of Tokyo Olympics, Aruna Quadri crashes out. It's very, very sad and painful as the Tigress bow to USA. That's also from the Olympics. And on the right, you are one of my enemies. Joshua tells Fury, says we must fight. Well, should I say bring it on? Not to me. That's the Nigerian Tribune this morning.
Would you have the stamina for one of his blows? I don't know if you will, Ayo. Bring it on. Well, take a look at what's on the front page of Daily Trust this morning. In major policy shift, CBN cancels 2.3 trillion naira forex sales to BDC. So that's how the Daily Trust is capturing that story for you. Practice unsustainable. That's according to Emefiele. I think that was obvious to the blind and and to the deaf as well. Mixed reactions as experts fear more pressure. Operators flaunting rules, aiding financial crimes. That's attributed to the CBN governor. APCON silent on new policy and allegations. So you find details on page 5 of the paper. A number of other stories here. Presidency administers secrecy oath on 42 staff. Yes, this oath is binding even when they are retired from service. That's what we need to understand. It's on page 4 of it, and I'm sure there's a reason why this has been resuscitated. A number of other stories just beneath the nameplate there. Bandits informants set self ablaze in Zamfara as 22 suspects nabbed. If you come to the bottom there, Atiku, a Nigerian, eligible for presidency. That's according to Adamawa government. Yeah, there have been questions as to, the part of Adamawa he's from. They went to Cameroon, but he was with Nigeria before this part. Huge questions there. Question is, why is this coming up now after he's been vice president of Nigeria? But let's leave it there. Oh, not before we say congratulations to the new wig. See that picture too, worth 1,000 words. Let's leave it there for Daily Trust newspapers.
I'll run through a couple more. Nigerian News Direct. Ban of forex sales shocks 5,000 BDCs. That's the Nigerian News Direct this morning. Ban of forex sales shocks 5,000 BDCs importers. Find the story on page 4. This continuation to mount pressure on exchange rate. Analysts say, well, more on that today. Very quickly, you find this one. Maiden National Gaming Conference holds Wednesday. Why is that important? Find out on page 4. Subscribe to the Speaker of the House of Representatives. Swearing in, don't be partisan. Sanwo-Olu LG Commissioner charge newly installed chairman. Find that story on page 10 of the paper this morning.
And if we look at New Telegraph for you, OPS expresses concern as CBN halts forex supply to BDCs. That's what New Telegraph has on their front page. 6 proper monitoring of banks. BDC executive holds crucial meeting. Apex Bank retains lending rate at 11.5%. You also see this one. NBA drags Buhari, NCC, 2 others to court over Twitter ban. That's also on the front page. IMF retains 2.5% growth rate projection for Nigeria. Raises 2022 forecast to 2.6%. Those are some of the stories making the rounds on the front page of New Telegraph. And if I may quickly run through this one on the front page of Leadership newspapers, Naira may slide as CBN bans forex sales to BDCs. Is the lead story for them as well. Apex Bank's decision confirms Leadership report that Nigeria's economy was bleeding from multiple exchange rates. BDCs got $5.28 billion in 11 months. Operators fear dollar scarcity. MSMEs panic. So there are implications for that move, courageous as it might be on the part of the CBN. But how will that affect you? You might want to read the papers this morning to see this. Look at this. U.S. offers to support Nigeria to end killings and extremism. That's also there on the front page of Leadership. Let's leave it there for the paper.
The Blueprint newspaper leads with something completely different. Anambra primaries, Matawale's defection threaten APC congresses. That's the lead story. Kwara to hold Congress despite Abdulrazak Lau feud. Governors roll out programs against poverty, unemployment. That's cheering. How far will that go? You find the details on page 6. And so many other stories that I'd leave you to do the picking yourself. And that's the much of the papers we can take today. And straight to the issues after these messages. Just stay with us.
This is the 4th Monetary Policy Committee meeting by the Central Bank of Nigeria this year. Rising from the 2-day meeting, the Governor of the Central Bank of Nigeria, Mr. Godwin Emefiele, reels out the Monetary Policy Committee decisions pertaining to the foreign exchange market. The Apex Bank boss gives commercial banks the marching orders on the sale of forex, vowing that they will be monitored closely henceforth.
The Central Bank will henceforth discontinue the sale of foreign exchange to bureau exchange operators. B. The bank will no longer process or issue new licenses for BDC operations in the country. This stoppage extends to all licenses being currently processed regardless of the stage of that processing. The public should note that once a customer provides the basic documentation to purchase foreign exchange, all banks must immediately, either on demand or within a stipulated time frame, sell foreign exchange to the customer. Any customer who does not receive foreign exchange along these lines must report this to their bank, and where they are unsatisfied with the resolution, they are required, indeed they must, contact the CBN on our toll-free line.
Threatening to deal ruthlessly with banks that work with these operators, the CBN governor adds that this move is to safeguard the nation's currency. He also has some words for those he claims are collaborating with the bureau de change operators.
We will deal ruthlessly with the Nigerian banks who have acted as collaborators with these illegal forex dealers. We will deal with them ruthlessly because they have allowed their banking and payment system infrastructure to be used to facilitate this illegal dealing in foreign exchange. As for those foreign organizations involved, we will report them to their regulators. We will write to those organizations seeking their understanding and that they must desist. If they seek to operate in Nigeria, they must go through the right channels through which they must procure either foreign exchange or procure naira for their domestic operations.
The decision to stop forex sales to the BDCs, the central bank governor says, will stop the greedy attitudes of these operators who have left their purpose of being retailers and have become illegal dealers.
From 74 period exchanges in 2005 to about over 5,000, as at July 2021. Most certainly something that the CBN considers very, very touching and needs to be dealt with. What are the pros? What are the cons? How does this affect, the nation, investment, development, and you name it? Well, Bongo Adi joins us this morning. He's an economist and lecturer at LBS. Thank you so much for joining us this morning, Mr. Adi. And I'm just wondering, first of all, did this come to you as a surprise?
Yes, actually, it was really a very shocking one. But I think I commend the CBN's courage in taking that decision. It wasn't an easy one to do. I mean, especially given the history of the development of BDCs in Nigeria. It was a highly politicized matter, so for him to take that decision, I think it requires a huge dose of courage.
It sounds like it's not something that would have been done normally, Mr. Hadi. So I'm just wondering, what are the consequences of this action, first of all?
Well, so we have to look at it. This is part of the CBN's, I think, though belated, but better late than never. One of the CBN policies to sanitize the macroeconomic system, especially when we are battling with, current account deficits, because whenever you have that situation, it's definitely will impact negatively on your exchange rates. And it's not just the current account deficit. When I talk about the current account deficit, I mean that our imports seem to, be more than our exports. And then we also have budget deficit as well, which the government is struggling to fund through massive borrowing. And we have seen that. So when you put all those two double deficit together, it means that we're going to have, a huge foreign exchange devaluation. So why they have to battle with that, then you now have this round tripping going on in the BDCs. And that has been on for too long. But the consequence, of course, again, it's not just about banning them. There are so many other complementary measures that the CBN must have to judiciously and rigorously pursue to ensure that this really, generate the right impact. Otherwise, it may not work. In 2016, when the CBN did this, that was in January 2016. Remember 2016, the year of recession? In January of that year, the CBN also banned the BDCs. Banned the sale of the dollars directly to the BDCs. Let's look at also the source where the BDC source their forex. They have the CBN. There's this limited allocation that is given to them, and I think that is what is driving this balloon in the growth of BDCs, because people are pursuing that allocation from the CBN weekly. And then they also, of course, from the open market, the people who get businesses that have their funds in foreign currencies, so a source. Then remittances. So those are the three sources by which the BDCs source their forex. Now, if CBN removes that, but you remember the reason why the BDCs thrived is because of the constraints and then the limitation in sourcing funds for forex from the banks. The process is long, rigorous. You have to fill all manner of forms and supply all manner of requirements. That actually leads to long queues. And many people are not patient for that. And that is why the BDC, even though at a premium, was thriving. So I don't know how the CBN is going to eliminate all these, the concerns that people have raising forex from the commercial bank. That has persisted, and it continues to persist. So if they are not able to make available that forex liquidity, then banning BDCs will not really lead to the desired impact. In fact, if anything, if we go by the experience of 2016, by January, the dollar was 268 naira. But by December of the same year, when BDCs were banned, we had 498. That's a depreciation of devaluation of 46%. And then the dollar rose against naira by 85%. That's massive. So if we go by that today, it means that by December this year, we may have dollar, trading at over 900 naira. So that may not be good for the economy. But again, it is a step in the right direction. But it all depends on other measures the CBN needs to embark upon, to ensure that there is enough forex liquidity in the market.
Well, it'll be very interesting to find out this, how the CBN intends to go about this last one that you have just mentioned, because, Nigeria, like many nations, has to deal with, other countries of the world in business and all of that, because, there are those who believe that while it encourages bilateral trade, it also deprives the country from benefits of multilateral trade. And so if this continues, I don't know, how do you expect, what are the measures that you would suggest that the central bank should put in place?
The first thing is to, they should, this is the time to actually deregulate completely the forex market. They should totally liberalize that market. What it means that let the dollar or naira finds its true value in the market. There shouldn't be any need for intervention. So the interventionist policies of the CBN in the past couple of years actually has meant, of course, the ordinary consumer in the market will think that because the CBN is defending the naira, therefore goods are coming cheap. But it's not all helping matters, because if you look at the quantum of funds the CBN has really devoted to defending the naira, that's massive. That should have gone to provision of much needed infrastructure. And again, that would have led, reduce inflation. Inflation rising is also part of the constitutive factors to, high exchange rates. So, we have to look at the inflation premium. The inflation has gone to 17, 18%. I mean, because if you go to the market, actually, it's more than that. Let me just give you this. A packet, 360 grams of pig milk, just last week was 1,000 naira. If you go back to buy it today, it's 1,500 naira. So what level of inflation does that tell you? And then these are some of the staples. So that's milk. Then food prices, the same thing. So actually, because the inflation, computation uses a basket of goods. So it's kind of underestimate the level of inflation in the country right now. I can tell you that it's more than the official rate of 17%. We will be looking at something in the neighborhood of 40% actually. So what is driving? So when you have that high level of inflation, you will not expect your exchange rate to be low. So part of the reasons driving this is the constraints in supply chain, in the internal market dynamics. So which I think infrastructure would have alleviated to a certain point, whereby prices will start to come down, cost of production will be lowered. So that will help consumers ameliorate a little bit of the sufferings they are going through. So then when CBN comes with these policies, then they will actually generate the right impact. Otherwise, it will not be, those impacts, the anticipated effect will not be engendered, despite the goodwill and the good intention.
Well, just to be clear, I mean, what you just said now, many people would resonate with. You're saying that the control measures put in place by the CBN initially before now was responsible in a way for the increase in food prices in the market. Is that correct?
Not necessarily. That's not what I'm saying, actually. But I'm saying that inflation. Okay, what is it that driving inflation? Inflation is driven by the lack of supporting infrastructure. Okay, those are indirect inputs to production. So we still have constraints in energy. We still have constraints in transportation. So many of the products, of course, we have security concerns as well. So what I'm saying is that supposing that the monies that the CBN has used in defending the naira over the years, I'm not talking about a small amount here. If that has been used actually to really invest in the real sector, we wouldn't be having, inflation would have reduced. And reduction in inflation means that exchange rate will also fall, because one of the key determinants of foreign exchange, appreciation or depreciation, is the inflation level. So we have to work that out to tell you how much inflation impacts on exchange rates. So that's just what I'm saying.
But there's also the challenge that we contend with, as a nation. We do a lot more importing than exporting. And what you are essentially talking about is if we can rear up our production capacity, we'll do a lot less importing and a lot more exporting. If that is the case, and I'm pretty sure that the CBN is not unaware of this, what should have been done, or what should be done now, in order for the benefits that the CBN intends to achieve by this action, is fully maximized?
Two things. The first one is deregulate the forex market. Of course, that will come with a whole lot of public uproar. But then, just as the CBN has been courageous in taking this move, I never expected this to happen under MFLA. So, I mean, that means the man is not actually what some people actually, thought. So, because if you understand the history of the evolution of BDCs, you will know that it was actually a political strategy to empower some segment of the country. It started during the time of Abu Kader Ahmed, who was the longest-serving CBN governor between 1982 and 1993. In fact, he served through Shagari all through the Buhari years up to the beginning of Sani Abacha. In fact, it was Sani Abacha that removed him. So he was there for a very long time. So he was issuing license, and the critics against him that time, one of them was that he kind of favored his own people awarding them licenses. And that's why you see some, the BDC market dominated by certain people from a certain region of the country. So it's actually what happened then. So, now the MFLA, we know where it comes from, went into this means that it's a very courageous move. I don't know if it's going to be sustainable, understanding the economy, the politics of the day in this country. So, but if it's going to be sustained, I think he should not stop there. The next thing to do is to move into fully deregulate that market. And then when that is done, then the second move should be to ensure that people have access to forests. So how do you get off or eliminate these constraints that we have in the banks? Commercial banks, that is a major source of forex, and the CBN window, and then we have there are three sources. We have the CBN, we have the exporter, investor, and exporter window, and then we have the commercial banks. So the constraints, especially in commercial banks, need to be eliminated to ensure that there is fluid, that when people need forex, they do not have to go through so many obstacles and hurdles before they can access it. If it's accessible, then I think the policy will now begin to be at the expected impact.
Yeah, huge. I mean, just putting a figure to how much it is that the central bank has spent with the BDCs in recent times. I'm looking at the front page of the leadership here, and they say it's as much as $5.28 billion in 11 months. That's a humongous figure. But something made the CBN go down this route in the first instance, deciding to sell forex to BDCs. Do you think at first that policy was wise in the first instance? It obviously hasn't been achieved. That's the reason why the CBN is going back to status quo ante, at least where we're coming back from. But what do you think? What are the modifications that you think will, be introduced now to make what we used to have work?
Okay, so you need to understand that we are talking about a market situation here. Rational incentives. We have this, the discrepancy in the rate. Let's go back to why the BDCs even, emerged to the level they are today. Let's go back to in the 1989 or something. So during the time of Babangida, I guess. So the official exchange rate was $22, the 22 naira to the dollar, and then in the para market it was 88 naira to the dollar. So what people did, it was round tripping. So that was an incentive for round tripping. People will go to the CBN, buy dollar 22 naira, and then come back and sell at the para market. Now that has not it disappeared. In fact, that is actually what has fueled this massive boom in BDC business. That's why everybody wants to acquire a license. If given opportunity, if I had the money, actually, I would get for the license, because that's the only way you make free money. Okay, so what does CBN do? The CBN simply fuels that speculation, because they sell at official rate, and then you come to the barrel market, and then you have that. So you cannot eliminate round tripping. You do not have the infrastructure. You do not have the enforcement mechanism to ensure that people do not do that. So rational consumers or rational sellers, what do? They look for means to get the cheap dollar from the CBN. Once they get it, they are going to the parallel market to sell it at a premium. So that's what has been happening. Now, what should the CBN do? You have to eliminate this discrepancy. Once the discrepancy doesn't exist, the BDCs will just be like any other business. Go source for your own dollar. Simple.
No, before the BDCs were even allowed to proliferate to this extent, we used to do it through the banks. It would seem that the CBN was trying to break the monopoly that the banks had, if you consider it that, by empowering the BDCs, but obviously that hasn't worked. The question is, going back to the banks, What do you think it needs to be done for the banks to be able to meet up what the CBN had in mind in the very first instance?
Okay, so first we have to, understand or scope the profile of the people who demand for forests. So you have forest demand for, paying fees abroad, like school fees, medical bills. And then you have this forest demand for people who are importing or international businesses. And then you have a little bit of local demand as well. So now, when you look at that, what are the processes, behind each of these? So each of these processes, if you've attempted them or if you've understudied them, you will understand that they have become very cumbersome. Okay, you have to open up forms here and there, you have to fill up this, and then it takes a longer time. Now, for businesses who work, very strict timelines, that's not so convenient. And then, so that is why initially it didn't work. The commercial banks were not able to meet the demand needs of forex, the demand need of people. So now that the CBN has, is going back to that status quo ante, then what is required is eliminate some of this. But again, we are living in the age where there are stricter, regulatory requirements, more prudential banking systems, that you don't just give out money. You have to verify the source and make sure that it's not going into the wrong hands. So I don't see how that's going to be eliminated. So the constraint will continue to be there. So the impact eventually, if we have to be pragmatic, it means that we will actually have higher, more depreciation of the naira, just like what happened in 2016, because that's just the only thing we can hang on to. By December, we'll have, if you have a 46% depreciation, then it means that if you have, if it is 500 naira to the dollar now, you will be having something in the nearing 900 or 900 something to the dollar.
Very, very scary figures which you're reading out there. But, Mr. Emefiele was also spitting some fire yesterday when he said, we're going to deal with them ruthlessly and we'll report to international bodies. And he was talking about banks who are allowing illegal forex dealers use their platforms. And when he says we're going to deal with them ruthlessly, what sort of... because some people are also thinking as a result of what has happened, the kind of allegations leveled against BDCs. First, do you think that any action will come out of this? I mean, aside the ban, or those who are processing and also the ban on forex to BDCs, do you think that there should be any extra action? I mean, because these allegations have not come from thin air, one would imagine that there has been some investigation and some people have been found wanting. Should there be some... punishment, penalties, it will seem, to the erring BDCs, and the measures being spelled out to the banks right now? Do you think it will be of any effect?
To answer you simply, it will be of no consequence. Why? People respond to rational incentives. And let's also begin to unpack the BDC system, okay? You will understand that the CBN itself is a sort of, I have to be, let me just wear my academic hat here. The CBN has operated a crony system. Government, or, what you call CBN of the cronies, for the cronies, by the cronies. So that is the way it has worked. Most of the people who operate the BDCs are somehow linked to the CBN. Okay, so you have this insider issue. Okay, so most people who get the license, you can't even get the license except you have some contacts at some high level at the CBN. So I know, we know this for a fact. So given this situation, now this carrot and stick approach will not work. The only thing that can work is let the market drive it. As far as you leave a room for some bit of round tripping or for people to game the system, they will do that. It's not a matter of threatening them with fire and brimstone. It will not work. Just let the market determine the exchange rate. That's a simple thing. If we're able to do that, then Naira will find its natural level. You will immediately eliminate the BDCs. It's not about threats.
How sustainable is that, considering just how fragile our current forex reserves are? How wise will it be? And, you know, the CBN's primary duty of trying to rein in inflation, how wise will it be for them to just let go and float the naira?
Yeah, I think we have to, again, I have to go back to theory. Of course, theory, there's always an exception to every rule. The theory, if you want, you know, the J-curve of the exchange rate, the J-curve goes this way, that when you deregulate or liberalize the foreign exchange rate, for the first few months, it could go to a year or so, maybe 12 to 18 months, you will now have a deep dive where it will actually plunge or plummet. Then eventually it begins to normalize, and then by that time the system would have adjusted and begins to appreciate. So that is something that we need to put into consideration. And then there is something else the CBN did in 2016, which I commend them for, which is opening up. You know, they started to sell the bills, the OMO, you know, bills to foreigners and institutional investors and foreign investors. So that actually helped them to ameliorate that the stringent condition, you know, imposed by the elimination or banning of BDCs. But it wasn't enough. It didn't stop Naira from falling from 268 or rising from 268 to 495 in 2016. But if they can do more of that, you know, and remove so many other constraints that we know about, you know, in you know, with people trying to import, especially repatriate capital, then maybe something could be achieved. But we cannot continue to postpone the evil day. Okay, so let's take that nasty decision, which will impose some bit of momentary hardship. We're already there. So. And hope that the complementary policies will also take effect, so that over time, maybe in less than 18 months, it normalizes, and then we'll be fine.
All right, so Dr. Adi, one question comes to my mind about this. You know, you talked about the sustainability of this initiative by the CBN. On the one hand, one looks at the short-term benefits, and then one looks at the long-term benefit, or rather long-term pro or con. I don't know which of the hats is going to fit in here, whether it's your economic hat or your lecturer hat. So you want to wear any one of them to kindly answer this question. In terms of sustainability, what are the short-term benefits? And what are the short-term cons? What are the long-term benefits, if any? And what are the demerits, if any, in the long term?
Very, very, very good question. The first one is, of course, the CBN is trying to rein in or kind of, you know, optimize the control of the exchange rate. Of course, you look at how we are in a very high inflationary phase. Currently, as I've mentioned, the double deficit, current account deficit, and the fiscal deficit. So the CBN is, and then we are borrowing heavily. So this is a point where the CBN really needs to be on top of things. Okay. So what it means is that they will need to bring everything within their coffers, and not allowing all of this speculation. So that is, in the short run, what we're seeing is the CBN's ability to really determine, control or manage the exchange rate, because they shouldn't even be controlling it. I don't want to use that word, but that is what they always like to do. But if they can manage it, then that will be fine. So, you know, because they now have, remember, we have high debt servicing rate. I think saying that 98 kobo out of every naira is now using debt servicing or so. And then our revenue is we are the revenue, the lowest, poorest revenue to GDP in the whole world. So, you know, so these are very huge challenges to the central bank, you know, and eventually we've seen, actually I've started talking about that even in classes and in my writings, that macroeconomic policies have become, you know, neutral. They're no longer effective, so it doesn't really matter what they do. We don't feel it in the real market. Everybody can bear witness to that. But okay, so this is I think this is an effort to ensure that, you know, they bring back that oversight, you know, power to the CBN, that their macroeconomic policies will begin to be felt in the real market. That's
Dr. Ari,
commendable. Yes.
just 1 second. You've talked about some of the pros of the short term, but we need to take a
Yes.
few messages now. When we return, you tell us the other side of this short term and the conclusion of the long term pros or cons. Please stay with us. Thanks for staying with us. Well, we're talking about the CBN's ban of BDCs and the short-term, long-term effects and all of that. How does this concern you? Well, Dr. Bongo Hadi is still with us. He's an economist and a lecturer at LBS. Well, so, Doc, you were talking about some of the short-term benefits or, cons and the long-term pros and cons. You stopped at the point of talking about the short-term benefits. Are there anything that we should be cautious of in the short term?
Well, in the short term, definitely we have to deal with more loss of value in the naira. So meaning that I don't know what it is this morning, but I think it's in the neighborhood of 505 for naira to the dollar. So we will expect more of that such devaluation going forward. That's a necessary evil. It will keep happening until eventually maybe things normalize. Now, what is it that drives the exchange rate, by the way? There are some politics about this, so I don't want to go into that, the political economy and all those conspiracy theories, not really conspiratorial as such, but we need to improve our export ability, okay? Improving the export ability means that, logistics situation, the distribution network needs to be addressed, and then that includes transportation, that includes energy. So infrastructure is still a key. So if we're able to build those enabling infrastructure, and then we look at the port infrastructure, both the soft and the hard infrastructure at the port, so that it's easy for people to export. So once we're able to key back into the global value chain and then diversify our export, then perhaps we begin to earn some bit of a more diversified revenue apart from oil, because that's all that's driving this whole thing. So this, what we're talking about here again, is what I think Patu Tomi is always talking about, our focus on revenue rather than production. So this is one of those revenue policies, revenue focus policies. How do we manage limited revenue rather than thinking of how do we expand production? If production is expanded, and then I think CBN has tried to play some good role in expanding the productive base of the economy. But they've done that by issuing, all of these soft loans they've been giving to people, which I think is not properly monitored, is not properly evaluated, meaning that at the end of the day, it could be the case that we do not get expected impact. Supposing that they can maybe change the mechanism through which that allocation is done, I don't think even the CBN needs to be involved in that. Maybe this should fully be commercialized, work with a combination of commercial banks and the consultants, leading consulting firms, even LBS, so that these things can be properly administered. Then there will be real accountability. Then eventually we begin to expand the productive base of the economy, even if we don't target to export to the rest of the world, but we can export to the rest of Africa. Now that will improve our export profile. So with that, this pressure, limited revenue, forest revenue, so to speak, we begin to ameliorate. Okay. Now, if that doesn't happen, so we are still, everything, this policy is about protecting what we have, the revenue that comes from oil, not about expanding the capacity of the economy to export, which is the only thing. In fact, it is that last, when you talk about the GDP identity, which we say GDP is equal to consumption plus investment plus government expenditure plus net export, that is export minus import. Now, the most important determinant of what happens in an economy is that external sector component, which is the current account, export minus import. If you export, definitely your exchange rate will begin to appreciate. If you are importing more than you are exporting, you will be in our situation. That is the real thing that needs to be addressed. The external sector. How do we export? How do we make our economy competitive? How do we gain some share of the export market? If we don't do that, then all these policies are just, after all, monetary policies in the long run are neutral.
Well, Dr. Bongadi, what you have just said now, for me, it's very, very interesting that we're even talking about improving the production capacity and export capability of the country. So I'm wondering how this policy will affect or encourage micro, small, and medium enterprises in particular. Because, I mean, many have complained about the need for us to improve production capacity. So I'm just wondering, with this position of the CBN, what other system in government at the federal level or at the state level ought to work in tandem with this policy in order for us to to milk the advantages or opportunities, the pros that you have talked about? CBN has taken this decision, but then it's not supposed, it's just one in a pool of activities in the economy. So what other infrastructure of government, what other ministries, departments, or agencies, what other things need to be done by who in order to be able to milk the pros, the advantages, the merits of this policy of the CBN?
Very brilliant intervention you've got there. Now, that is the real question, okay? CBN has done more than enough, has taken even more than, I think it's bitten off more than it could chew, simply because the other arms of government, the other components of the infrastructure of governance are not working, okay? So CBN begins to now see itself and over-expand. It has done enough. Exactly, what's going on in my mind, and then you brought it up. You see, when it comes to growth, when it comes to building export capability, we are now talking about global value chains. And then when we talk about global value chains, we are now trying to key into ownership of capital. We do not own capital. We do not own technology. So meaning that we have to somehow negotiate with the owners. Now, who is it that intervenes? Who is it that leads the way? It is the government. Okay, we have these cases. I mean, for instance, there are countries in Asia, whether the Japanese or the Koreans or the Chinese. You understand how they relate with global capital. They will send a delegation that will go to meet and sit with some of these global big businesses. They negotiate conditions for them to come into their country, conditions for them to invest, and then give them all manner of concessions. Government takes the leading role. Even in Africa, back home here, so I don't need to go to China and all of those places. Paul Kagame, until recently, was every day in Nigeria. What was Paul Kagame doing? Paul Kagame was wooing Nigerian investors, Nigerian businessmen and women to come to Kigali. And today you have very strong Nigerian presence in the Rwandan economy. Okay, now what has that led to? You will now see Rwanda is the most the fastest growing and the most advanced African economy in the space of less than a decade because of Paul Kagame's proactive pursuit of growth. We even here, when you listen to somebody like P2B talk, you will learn what he did, to revitalize the economy of Anambra State. He took the leading steps. He went out, he traveled abroad, he was meeting with multinationals and wooing them, giving them all manner of concessions to come to invest in Anambra State. Now, we have not seen that with this current government. The presidency is all about, rebuffing attacks and then, things that are not important, that don't matter. And eventually, there wasn't the situation. So I think the CBN has done much. Now the onus is on the other arms of government, especially the presidency. The presidency should take the lead, and then all the ministers, should begin to look at how to woo investors into the various sectors. That is not happening. It is still about this production of revenue. Everybody is worried about sharing formula, of a disappearing pie. Nobody is interested in growing the pie. I think that is why we are locked into this mess.
Well, and certainly, unless we improve capacity, it will seem like the pie is just going to get smaller by the day. God forbid. Well, Dr. Bongo Ali, we have to thank you very much for your conversation with us this morning. He is an economist as well as a lecturer at LBS. Thank you so much for your time and your thoughts on this issue.
Thank you very much. Thanks.
Well, there is so much to talk about, and the question now is, How do you get involved? We'll be back for that.
Well, some insight into our next segment now. It's been titled Watching the Civic Space. And if I were just to give context to that, reading from a particular website which monitors civic space. They say civic space is the bedrock of any open and democratic society. When a civic space is open, citizens and civil society organizations are able to organize, participate, and communicate without hindrance. Now, has there been any hindrance or obstacles in the last couple of months, years, I don't know, to shed light on why it is important to keep tabs on what is happening in the civic space? And there has been a lot of talk in recent times. Don't forget that we've had a there's a constitutional amendment process currently ongoing. There have been attempts to amend the Electoral Act. That is still ongoing as well. There have been talks around the media. We saw a protest about 2-3 weeks ago on the front pages of the dailies. There's also been a lot of talk around the directive recently issued to the broadcast organizations in Nigeria from the regulator about how newspaper headlines should be reviewed. There have been those kinds of conversations. So why is it important to continue to keep tabs on our civic space? We have with us this morning Reverend Father Atta Barkindo, who is the Executive Director of the Kuke Center. Father, you're welcome to Sunrise Elite this morning.
Thank you so much, Malco, for having me.
Well, pretty interesting times we're in right now, and I'm sure that quite a lot has been going on in the civic space. In your own opinion, would you say that our civic space is expanding? Are citizens more aware of their duties as citizens and are even better aware of how better to influence policies in their own favor?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. Increasingly, Nigerians are fully becoming aware of their rights they are expressing themselves. But of course, among Nigerians too, there are two narratives that are currently existing. One is people who feel very strongly that the civic space is shrinking because of some of the issues you have mentioned, the banning of Twitter, you know, the NSAS protests and the way it was suppressed, and with all these bills coming out in terms of the media. But there are other people who actually argue that it is thriving. Nigerians are having conversations on a daily basis, in the markets, in the cars, on the plane, under the tree, everywhere they go, and that anywhere you meet a Nigerian, they have an opinion on its politics and the way the country is actually governed. And this is even amplified with the presence of the social media, where we talk, we interrogate. But probably what has happened is that we are not collectively talking in a strategic and a comprehensive manner. So the intellectual component that should accompany governance is actually missing. You can talk, but how are these views and opinions collated and designed into a comprehensive policy statement that can actually support the government? And I think that for me, this is where it is slightly lacking. Because I think you don't actually have to go to school. If a particular government policy is affecting you and your family, as we say in Nigeria, hunger will make you discover your talent. I think people have opinions on how things should be. And some of these opinions, I think, should be collated in a comprehensive and a strategic manner that can support governance. We don't actually have to insult each other.
In your own opinion, I'm wondering, would you say, because you have tried to balance the two sides in terms of those who say it is shrinking and those who say, well, we're talking more. Have there been any recent instances where citizens have been able to organize to influence policies that could affect them either positively or negatively?
Absolutely. I was part of the Kuka Center myself. We were part of the drive, particularly for example, the electronic transmission of results. I know how organizations like PLAC, Iaga, Not Too Young to Wrong, the Kuka Center, with so many support from other people. We kept pushing and going to the National Assembly. And I think eventually there were delays, and that was why you see the passage of that bill had the kind of controversy that at the end of the day it had. Because a lot of citizens were following, they were aware, they were reading the bills, they were literally interrogating, making phone calls, back channel negotiations and all that. But ultimately, it's not every Nigerian citizen that has this opportunity, has the opportunity to have access to those who are in power, to those who are policymakers. It's very few people, and you really have to know where the buttons are that you can actually press. So what happens to the views of millions of other Nigerians who are actually affected by some of these policies? How can we bring some of these views, to the fore? So in my own personal opinion, I think that it is shrinking at different levels. At serious policy levels where we have access to government and we can talk, I think there's a bit of serious opposition probably from the government. But for ordinary people, they're expressing their views, because for those who are in power, maybe those views don't matter anyway, because those ordinary people may not have that strength to directly, confront them, to directly be in their face. So I think that it depends on how you look at it.
It's a very interesting distinction that you make in terms of the different spaces that exist. That in terms of having daily conversations, and I think that distinction is extremely important. In terms of having daily conversations, Nigerians are talking amongst themselves, and it would seem there is no hindrance to that, is there? But in terms of having the space for influence in terms of politics and policies, it would seem that is the space that is shrinking.
Absolutely,
so
it is.
I'm just reiterating what I heard you say, and I think that distinction is extremely important. The NSAS protest, which we saw last year, when you saw that protest, as someone who's participated very actively in the civil society, what came to your mind?
Actually, when the protest was going on, I was in Gombe. We were implementing a project at Operation Safe Corridor. Interestingly, the perception in the north, in most parts of the north, local community, among young people, was completely different from what you see in the south. For northerners, these NSAS young people, for most of the young people in the north, they are like, these guys are scammers, Yahoo boys, drug dealers. They are simply in opposition to the government. But that is not the case in the south. So you do not have this united front that should exist in terms of understanding what is the common good, what are we actually fighting for. And I think one of the points I need to make is that probably within our capacity to deploy the civic space is that one of the biggest challenges you see, we are affected by the issues of fake news, lack of evidence research and data. So people engage within the civic space on the basis of sentiment, sometimes a bit of prejudice, a bit of misinformation, misrepresentation. So how do we get facts and evidence that can guide the engagement of ordinary people? Because there's lots of misinformation out there, and people can simply pick up a piece of news on Facebook, for example, without interrogation, without critical analysis. They begin to engage without having the facts in their hands. And I think that is a challenge, especially among ordinary people that don't have the sphere of influence. And there are all kinds of fake news that litter around. And I think it's a challenge. And I think that affected the NSAS protest. That's why you saw the division that you have seen.
I'm looking at, the disparity which you just mentioned, and indeed it was not difficult to see when we saw NSAS protests in Lagos and in some other parts of the country, and we saw, oh no, we want SARS protests in certain parts of the country as well. There were huge questions, and I think that you have underlined what the major problem is: the common good. What is the common good? And I sometimes people will say that is what the leadership should be able to find, the common denominator. But it would seem that what we have seen so far is a divide and rule in such a way that it only favors the political class. They understand that sometimes what might favor A might not be in tandem, what B might not really care about, and what B might care about might not really be the problem of A. And sometimes it will seem that they play these differences to their own advantage. Seeing this, first and foremost, how can citizens begin to find underlying things which will, be their unifying factor, if you like, their common denominator that will be the minimum, will spell good for A and will also spell good for B, when you look at how divided it would seem we are along so many lines?
I think if you look at existing political theories, there is a fundamental distinction between state building and nation building. The state building is the physical infrastructure, the roads, the hospitals, and all that. Nation building is about managing our diversity, managing our differences, and living together without mutual suspicion. And I think that is really where the challenge has lied. And I think for me, managing our diversity should also be seen as a common good, because it is absolutely so important. If we do not address that, then the divide and rule that you mentioned will actually become a problem. When there's poverty, when there's sickness, when there's hunger, they don't know tribe, no religion. We can all become victims. And that is why good governance should make the common good an essential ingredient. And at the moment in Nigeria, managing our diversity, I think to me should be a common good. And we have not actually handled that properly.
Let me quickly take this to my colleague now. I understand that he has questions for you, as well as going to introduce our next guest, Ayo.
Well, it would seem like we looked into the same crystal ball, Malkwe, because I was going to ask just the same question you asked. Maybe they'll use different words, because if we do not have a unifying factor on the side of A and on the side of B, that will always be an issue. But so you've answered that to an extent, Father Barkindo, but let me bring in our next guest now. He's Ahmed Sulaiman, a rights activist and lecturer of international humanitarian law at ABU Zaria. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. First of all, let me ask you, do you think that the civic space is widening or is being stifled?
Good morning. Good morning.
Morning.
I think the issue is not the shrinking of the civil space.
Your TV set so that we can hear you better, or just mute it so that, yes. Go ahead.
Hello?
Yes, we can hear you. Go ahead.
Okay. I think the question needs to be rephrased. The question should be reframed like this. Our civic space, are they rising up to the responsibility? The issue to me, as it appears, is not an issue of stifling civil space, but an issue of civil space not rising to the demanded responsibility of civil space. For instance, Nigeria is passing through a stage. We need a civil space that understands the trends and bring in capacity, activity that fits the required gap. Like the previous speaker stated, there are two things involved: nation building and state building. Nigeria is passing through nation building, but our civic space, instead of concentrating on nation building, they are rather defining and overemphasizing our diversity, which is even creating more problems on ground. And believe me, this is a very serious trend. If you take the part that Somalia, India, Sudan have taken, the civil space is leading us to a dangerous trend. Libya took this way, and the end result was catastrophic. So we need a civil space that understands the trend. For instance, I've been an active player in civil space. I led the Occupy Kano movement in Kano, where we occupied Kano line. But later I came to realize that most of these disruptive activities do not build a nation. And that is why, for instance, me as a person, I mature up to what I call redefining civil space, redefining activism. So our civic space need to redefine activism. So that instead of always emphasizing on what divides us, let us emphasize on growing up, strengthening our weakness. How much are we focusing on bringing local government to play its active role? How much more are we checking our state government to rise up to the demanded expectations?
Well, you have raised critical issues that I think, will definitely need further examination, because there are a number of issues kept coming to my mind as you were speaking, but we'll take them on when we return from this break. Please stay with us. Thanks for staying with us, Reverend Father Bakindo, as well as Ahmad Suleiman are still our guests, and we're talking about the civic space. So let me come back to you, Mr. Suleiman. On the back of what Father Bakindo said the other time about the different reactions to, during the, NSAS protests and all of that, when one side is saying we want it, one side is saying no, we want SARS to remain. And he also talked about the common good. Do you think that in watching the civic space, we have a mutual understanding of what is common good as a nation?
Yes. To have a common good, you need a balance. You need a proactive civil space that is proactive in terms of pushing us to progress, but also watchful in terms of the hazard. Now, the problem with civic space in Nigeria and activists is that, meanwhile, they push for what they think is progressive. Most of us are not aware of the hazards we are pushing the country into. And seriously, from my background, from my experience as an activist, I came to learn that this is a serious lapse. And as a lawyer, as an academic, I've studied a lot of countries that tend to manage this balance. And believe me, the end result of this error is catastrophic. Take Libya, for instance. Activists in Libya wanted progress. They pushed for progress. At the end of the day, they disrupted what the system they have. And the situation they are now is worse. Now, take for instance, Somalia. So Nigeria is in this situation where we need to have a proactive civil space, but should be responsible, not a civil space that try to ignite our diversities. Take the recent issues with Sahara and all that. Instead of bringing the country united, most readers now are now rather touched by the sensitivity of what they publish. Take some of the comments by some people that push for either self-determination and all that. At the end of the day, they end up injuring other people. So we need to come down. The common good means, where should Nigeria be? What happened to our security? I'm so happy that the last program you had ended with a comment. They say, unless we improve our capacities, there will be no progress. And I want to add to that unless we maintain our security, there will be no improvement in capacity. So civil space must be mindful of this very tight balance. And the problem with Nigeria is that if you take most of our activists, you'll find out that they are erring on the side of hazard and danger to our stability, to our security, and to our unison as a country.
It leads me back to the same question, Mr. Suleiman. By the way, could you kindly turn down the volume on that TV set, because it's still howling back and we are unable to really enjoy the wonderful things that you're saying. But if you also recall, I'm on the website, for instance, of the United Nations Human Rights Office. And in defining the civic space, one of the elements, crucial elements at that, is, excuse me, engaging in dialogue. And I ask that against, that same question of whether or not we have a mutual understanding. Do you think on all sides of the divide, among all practitioners of the civic space, all those who are active in the civic space, do you think we've been able to have that engagement, that conversation, to define mutually what is the common good for Nigeria? You have talked about that it as well, that we need a common good that is for Nigeria. Do you think we have a mutual understanding, given all the diversity that we have, you know, as a nation, all within the same pot, so to speak?
Yes, we have a problem there. There are two basic problems. The first problem is that popular opinion in Nigeria, the rate of literacy is very low. A lot of people are not very exposed. Secondly, even the activists, some of our activists are yet to mature up to the level where their activities can play an influence. And let me refer to an experience here. Formerly, over a decade ago, I've been engaged in this disruptive activism. But when I redefine activism, I came to see that my impact is more fruitful. For instance, there are a lot of policies in this government that have come together with some NGOs, and we've been able to redirect the policy. Take for instance, there was a time there was a crisis between CAN and federal government about the CAC. Some of us saw that right now Nigeria do not need these kind of diversities and problems. We came together, me and Senator Ita Enang, we moderated, we mediated, we started with the federal government, we started with CAN, we tried to take the concern of SAN, we took the concern of federal government, and we came with a mediatory role. So this is what I'm saying about activism. Activism is about defining what a country needs to move ahead, coming together, do it without the need to impress anybody by disrupting the country. But if you are rather taken away by international pressure, then you have a problem. We need to learn from the lesson of Professor Lee. He said countries and nations need to think internationally but act locally. If you look at all countries that have tried to redefine their interests according to their specific needs and mindful of their specific threats have moved ahead. There are a lot of countries I can cite a lot of them, like Rwanda, for instance, you said. Rwanda passed through a serious crisis and they came to realize that diversities and all that is not their problem. So they focus on progress and play down all negative and divisive tendencies. Rwanda is moving ahead now in Africa. Now, if you take countries
just one moment, Mr. Suleiman, you raised a crucial issue that's been on my mind that I just wanted you to land. So let's just go there. Do you think our diversity could be a problem in one way or another? Do you think our sentiments, you know, ethnic sentiments, religious sentiments, political sentiments, do you think they play a role in the civic space? Do you think it affects the way the civil society organizations in, in the various parts of the country lead the people in this democracy?
Seriously, it's playing a very terrible and negative role. These are diversities. And we need educated ones among us to lead our people towards collective interest, that is national interest, and play down more on our diversities. Because our diversities will bring us down. The issue is like this. You have what is called centripetal and centrifugal forces. Now, to build a nation, you have to manage these forces. But in Nigeria, these competing diversities are now pushing the centripetal forces so far that the whole nation is tilting towards a failed state. And that is why you have a problem with the central government in this situation, that we want to bring all possible force to keep the country together. Now, some countries have been able to survive this. Some countries survived it. Some countries couldn't. Countries like South Africa survived it. Nelson Mandela provided a leadership that where his focus was not about revenge or anything. His focus was about South Africa as a nation. Now, other countries like India, when they started, they couldn't manage. Mahatma Gandhi wanted a national collective interest. But they couldn't manage, it broke down into Pakistan and Bangladesh. Now, if you take Sudan, they couldn't manage, they broke down. And I'm telling you, if you take a statistics of all these countries that are broken down, their situation is far worse than what it would have been.
We seem to be
Pakistan and India have the diversity they would.
Right. Well, Mr. Suleiman, the issues are not just going to go away unless we do the needful. But let me quickly, just one moment, let me take this to Reverend Father Bakindo. Father Bakindo, it would seem like if we are going to take this issue up and deal with this as we should, then the conversation of a common good on all sides of the divide will have to start with the civil society organizations that lead in the civic space. You remember the Vice President is one of those who have said that we are seriously divided against, in our fault lines. We have very, very serious fundamental fault line issues. And in talking about this, in watching the civic space, it would seem like the CEOs need to begin the dialogue among themselves and then take this one message of a common good all over the nation. How do you propose that we do that, if you agree?
In my opinion, the civic space is not a human person. It's a collection of different voices, and ultimately is a reflection of what this country is. So the common good for me is also our common citizenship, our common identity. And over time, Nigeria has failed to mold a common identity for all of us, to an extent that where to be a Nigerian is more important than your tribe and your religion. And that has to be reflected in our rules, in our constitution, in all the regulations that surround us. And it's very difficult to have the common good and to have a collective voice, either within the country, either within the civil society, if over years a country is governed on the basis of inequality, marginalization, and exclusion. And I think that has been our biggest challenge. So it's very difficult to cultivate a common citizenship when there are issues of inequality, injustice, marginalization, and exclusion. A lot of people live on the fringe. They are not being heard. Their voices are not recognized. And that's why everyone has withdrawn into the womb of their religion, of their ethnicity. Because to get admission, even in a hospital, I probably need to speak a certain language. I probably need to know someone that knows someone that knows someone. And so a country that continues on this path is very difficult to really understand even what the common good is. So for me, at the constitutional level, we must cultivate the common citizenship. What does it mean to be a Nigerian? But if we continue to preach where one religion is superior, one ethnic group is superior, different types of laws exist for the citizens, one in the south, one in the north, and where the constitution is not subscribed to by all Nigerians, I think that becomes really a problem. Up to now, we are still fighting. Is Nigeria a secular state? Is it a religious state? How do you even interpret the secularity of the Nigerian state? What does it mean to be a citizen? So for me, if you want to define the common good, there are certain rules and regulations that we also have to follow, particularly the constitution. So we need to define that very properly.
So what do you think should be leading this conversation? I think that's a very key question.
We have all the structures of democracy in place. But I think that for people who are already in power, to protect their positions, to protect their offices, to protect their political careers and their political futures, in so many ways they don't seem to be interested. We, the citizens, must really take this up, particularly the civil societies, and lead the way. And that's what we have been really struggling to do. When you have millions of people already impoverished, living in poverty, in hunger, what a lot of Nigerians are right now thinking about is survival. So to even have this engagement is very difficult. And that's why it is very few Nigerians that have access to those who are in power, to those who have influence. And those numbers, I don't think, are good enough. And one of the biggest issues is just the division within even the civic space. They don't have a common voice to speak on issues that really matter in this country. And I think that is a thing of concern.
I mean, I'd like to go back. I mean, you heard our guest who's joining us via Zoom, and I'm wondering what your own thoughts are with what he talks about in terms of what could happen if the civic space is mismanaged. He gives examples of what has happened in Libya, in Somalia, and he's made these references. What are your thoughts in that regard? Because there are those who will say that the security situation cannot be ignored in terms of, you know, how the civic space is perceived. What are your thoughts with regards to that and where we currently are with our security situation?
Last week I was listening to the Attorney General Malemi, and he spoke about people engaged in the civic space. And whatever you say, whatever your agitations are, should be in the common interest of Nigeria, should add to nation building. But it's always very difficult if these things are happening in the context of injustice, in the context of marginalization. And I understand. But we also have to know that those who are within the civic space are also contributing to see how we can bring security and stability. It's not just that those who are speaking, who are protesting, they simply want to disorganize the country. A lot of people are victims already. Their families are probably being kidnapped. Their children are being with kidnappers. You don't expect them to sit at home and just be quiet. It's absolutely not possible. So when they go onto the streets, they protest. Does that mean they are adding to insecurity? I don't think so. They simply want their voices to be heard. And they want the government up and doing to see what the government can do, you know, in stabilizing the situation.
Let me quickly throw this now to our guest online. Sir, I was going to ask you, what are your thoughts? I mean, you have heard him talk about, you know, the reasons why sometimes people are on the street, why it is that they want to get their voices heard. Would you say, in your own opinion, that government has encouraged a peaceful engagement with government? Because it would seem that oftentimes when we look at the history of agitations in Nigeria and those whose voices have been heard, it would seem that even government selection of which voice to listen to has been has encouraged people to take to the streets, has encouraged some form of violent agitation, such that if you do not become violent, it would seem that you might not get heard. Take a look at some of the agitations we're currently seeing and what we've seen in the past. What are your thoughts on that? It looks like we're having some issues with audio there. We cannot hear you. If you will kindly unmute yourself, and maybe we'll be able to hear you. I don't know if you can hear. Obviously, you can hear us. Let us see if we can rework that. Oh dear, we seem to be having some issues with that audio there. But let me quickly ask you what your thoughts are, because it would seem that somehow government, if people do, you know, if people take to the streets more, it would seem that it's because peaceful channels either very, very few and far between, or that they rarely exist. Yes, the NSAS protest is a different kettle of fish in that we have now seen some response, especially on the parts, there was some mandate on the part of the federal government asking state governments to set up judicial panels to listen to the grievances of people. But that would never have come about without people taking to the streets in the very first instance. What channels do you think need to exist for government to be able to have been able to take on this complaint in the very first instance without people having to take to the streets? And how do you think, I don't want to ask you double barrel question, let's take that on first.
I mean, you are absolutely right. I will go with you. I think over time what has emerged is what we call the political economy of conflict. Right with the Niger Delta militants, we fight, the government settles us, gives us amnesty. Boko Haram emerge. Let us fight, the government settles us, rehabilitates us, sends us back into our communities with startups. We even look better than the victims who have been there and living in IDP camps. So with all these instances, it's very clear that the political economy of protest, so government will only listen to us when sometimes we go physical, when sometimes we, and so the government really has to manage in terms of dialogue, in terms of actually listening. I know if you are in power, different people come to you with all different stories. You have to be critical to select. And that's what we are actually trying to do, like our event today at the Kuka Center. We literally even want to engage university students to begin to teach them on how these civic spaces, on how to engage the government without getting physical, without getting violent. And I think for the government coming down to the level of the people, it will be quite nice to see them talk in a comprehensive and in a strategic manner. That
sort of engagement is extremely important. That sort of education. We know that at some point civics was introduced in secondary school. That I don't know if it's still a course that is studied in secondary schools. But that level of education, because it would seem that a lot of people are learning their rights as citizens, maybe on social media, but are not quite aware of what their duties are supposed to be in a democratic setting.
Absolutely, and you'll be shocked the level of ignorance even at universities, polytechnics and schools. And this is the project we have been doing in partnership with the Yaradua Foundation and Global Rights, literally going to these universities, talking to people, educating them on how to take advantage of the civic space and bring their voices to the heart. You know, sometimes with the government, even if there's a bomb blast, seeing the president, seeing a particular minister, showing compassion and sympathy is also the use of the civic space. I don't want to see the civic space as something only to be deployed by civil society organizations. All of us are citizens, including those who are in power. So for them to come down to the level of the ordinary Nigerian, to engage, that is the use of the civic space. So we need to see that coming forward, and that will de-escalate the situation, because there's so much accumulated grievances amongst ordinary Nigerians, and you need to ventilate that, and the government has to help in doing so.
Let me quickly take this now to our guests who are still online. We couldn't get his audio earlier, but I think that Mr. Ahmad Suleiman is back for us. If you did hear my question earlier with regards to how government itself has encouraged some agitations, what are your thoughts on that, and how do you think that government can begin to show that you do not have to, come take to the streets before whatever it is that you have to say is heard?
I think there are areas we have to give a thumb up to the government. There are areas that one may advise government to improve upon. The areas that will have to give a thumb up to government is, for instance, this NSAS. When they started, whatever they demanded, government was ready to let them have it. I wish and hope government will continue to remain focused on that. Another instance I can also cite, when there was this pending crisis about Corporate Affairs Commission Act and between CAN and the federal government, when some of our NGO ambassadors for peace, along with Senator Eta and I, we came, government listened to us. They were ready to let us mediate. We also got the concern of CAN. We went and saw them, and they were ready to listen. And I wish, like the Reverend Father said, government will improve upon this, so that most of these grievances, sometimes all it takes is give a space for it to be ventilated. But on the other side, we should not turn the hands of government to let it be so passive that divisive activities take us to the edge. So it's like I've started in the beginning of my discourse. It is a very tight balance. There is no perfection in it. You have to always maintain an equilibrium. You have to watch out for the balance. Because if you are too soft, it also spells doom. If you are too hard, it spells doom. So you have to do what Obasanjo said, a carrot and stick. Sometimes you listen, sometimes you keep a firm stand. Obasanjo tried that approach when terrorism started in Plateau and all that. There are times he maintained a firm foot. So I think government should also maintain that, and I see government doing that. I can see government when it comes to activities that trend our diversity. I can see government very strong on it. I hope government should continue being that. Whatever threatens, because even our own jurisprudence, Nigerian jurisprudence, if you look at the case of how do you call this guy? Supreme Court have maintained that whenever Dubovo versus Asari, Dubovo Asari versus the government, Supreme Court have always maintained that whenever there is a threat to security or national unity, government should, all other considerations, including even our freedoms, should take a second place. So government should maintain that balance. As far as I'm concerned, I think there are areas we can score government very high, like some of the instances I've cited. But there are areas that government also needs to improve.
Well, Mr. Suleiman, if you can hear us, somehow your audio is still not very good, but we have to thank you for your submissions on the program this morning. Thank you for sharing your thoughts with us on how to improve the civic space and make the most of it. Ahmad Suleiman is a rights activist and lecturer at International Humanitarian Law in the ABU Zaria. Thank you so much for joining us on the program. Let me also thank you so much, Reverend Father Atta Barkindo, who is the Executive Director of the Kuka Center. Thank you so much for coming on Sunrise Elite this morning.
Thanks for having me.
Well, we're not leaving without taking your mails. Let's quickly take a look at some of your thoughts this morning. And some of you are already intervening on the earlier conversation we had on Senate withdrawing from the CCT bus assault. This one is from Famous Timilehi, who says, our courts and lawyers should wake up to uphold the rule of law. When the ordinary man couldn't get justice in court, the so-called big men will continue to refer to court since they have the control. As far as this continues, people will continue to agitate. That's from Famous Timilehi.
Well, Ikedi Chris is weighing in on the same issue, says, Sunrise Daily Team, this case is crystal clear that our so-called big men use their ill-gotten positions and money against the downtrodden. Why didn't he go to court against the poor security man and his company when he felt assaulted ab initio? He rushed to the court because he has seen the dimensions of the case. It is left for the Senate to prevail for justice. God is watching us.
And this one is from Rakpo Sota, talking about that matter as well. He says, would it not have been a better option for the counsel to the security guard to have petitioned the National Judiciary Council rather than the Senate? I think it's the most appropriate agency to deal with the misconduct by judicial officers. Or that's a suggestion by Rakpo Sota.
Well, the question that you want to ask is, how judicial is that one? Well, on the matter of the CBN's ban of Forex to BDCs, Baba Shetima Kukawa says, this bold decision is highly commendable and the CBN must take steps to revoke all existing BDC licenses. The decision might have some drawbacks, but obviously the pros far outweigh the cons. Kudos to CBN.
And from Olagunjola Dele, talking about the CBN ban, he says the central bank appears unwilling to relax monetary policy because it wants to better control speculation in the property market and shadow banking. There have been slight relaxations in capital flows recently because the complex market forces are usually the dominant driver of currency exchange rates. We can never be sure that consensus views as to what governments are doing to influence exchange rates are the full and true story. That's Olagunju's point of view.
On the same issue, Oshinor Kingsley says it's indeed a bold and courageous move by the CBN, but the solution provided is not workable. Getting your savings from our banks is sometimes difficult than getting a Canadian visa. The banks wouldn't be able to meet the genuine demand for Forex, which will eventually put the Naira at strenuous position. It's better for CBN to monitor the BDCs while erring operators are vehemently punished. That's from Oshinor Kingsley. We also got your message, Ishola Bolariwa, as well as Brendan, who sent in from London. Thank you so much for your comments. And that's the show today.
Thank you for watching this morning.
Yeah. Go ahead.
I'm Malcolm Yusuf.
And I'm Ayo Makinde. Have a wonderful rest of your day, and please remain safe.